Given all of this emphasis and all this time Jesus spends talking about the kingdom and its importance and this way of heaven being accessible to our lives now, if there are two groups of people that Jesus says will never get in, chances are we would like very much to not be in those two groups of people, yes? So I want to take a look at both of these groups as we finish this series this morning. Two groups that Jesus says will never get in. Here's the first one. This is in Matthew 5. This is the Sermon on the Mount. We've looked at part of this text in the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6. This is one chapter earlier in Matthew 5, starting in verse 17. Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. Truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter in Greek. New Testament is originally written in Greek. In Greek, not one stroke of a letter is not one iota, or not one iota is where we get that expression from. Iota is a lowercase I in Greek. So when he says not one stroke of a letter, he's like not even the smallest whoosh, not one letter, not one whoosh, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all of it is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, if you've been hanging around Jesus, hanging around church for a while, you probably know the scribes and the Pharisees as the villains of the story, yes? Scribes and Pharisees are hypocrites. They are the people who are in power, and when Jesus comes to upset that balance, they do what people in power tend to do, which is try to hold on to their power no matter the cost. These guys are at odds with Jesus at almost every turn. So you and me in 2022 in a church on a Sunday morning in the United States, when we see scribes and Pharisees, we immediately tend to go to, those are the bad guys. So when Jesus says, unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and Pharisees, you'll never get in, there's a part of us, there's a part of me that can say, okay, got it, don't be a hypocrite, that sort of stuff. But the original audience, the people who might have heard Jesus say this, or those first century first Christians, when they hear, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. When they heard that, their thought probably would have been, I mean, aren't the scribes and Pharisees supposed to be the ones who are getting it right? Aren't the scribes and Pharisees supposed to be the ones who know the most about God, who know the most about righteousness? Aren't the scribes and Pharisees supposed to be the ones, if anybody's got it figured out, they should be the ones who have it figured out? In the original audience, there would have been this sense that if the scribes and Pharisees can't get in, who can get in? If my righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees, I don't have a good shot of my righteousness exceeding the scribes and Pharisees, so if they can't get in, I'm probably not going to get in. If they can't get in, who can get in? And I think for Jesus, there's a bit of that that's kind of the point. Because if we back it up, if we back up to the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, if we back up to when Jesus starts on this whole discourse, this Matthew 5, 6, and 7 discourse, in which we get some of the most famous or most memorable sayings in the whole text, the Lord's Prayer, the Golden Rule, all kinds of metaphors and parables that would become famous to us, all of these things that are so valuable to us, love your enemies, all of that. The whole Sermon on the Mount also begins with the kingdom of God. And it begins this way in Matthew 5, a few verses earlier. This is Matthew 5 in verse 3. Here's the first thing Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes I want to hear this as, blessed are the rich in spirit. Because surely if the kingdom of heaven is going to belong to anybody, it must be them, right? Surely the kingdom of heaven must belong to the rich in spirit. And in saying that, there's a bit of saying, surely the kingdom of heaven must belong to us, right? The people who come to a place like this on a Sunday morning. But Jesus from the beginning says this kingdom of heaven is not something for the rich in spirit. It's not something for those who trust in their own righteousness. From the very beginning, this kingdom is for the poor in spirit. There's this upside down truth here, which is a lot of in the Sermon on the Mount and how Jesus teaches, that it doesn't go the way we think it might, but the good news is even better than we might give it credit for. The kingdom of heaven is not for people who believe they are good enough for it. The kingdom of heaven, this thing that Jesus talks about first and most in all of this, it's not for people who think they're good enough for it or they've earned their way to it or whatever the case may be. It's not about our goodness. It's about the goodness of the news and the goodness of who God is in Jesus. And this kingdom is for, essentially this verse is saying, the more attuned we are to our need for it, the better we'll see it. The more we come as people who are fully aware of our need for grace, the more we'll find grace at work in our lives and at play in our world. If you trust in your own righteousness, you'll never get in. And even those who are perceived to be the best, the brightest, the most righteous, all of that stuff, unless your righteousness exceeds theirs, you won't get in. But this thing belongs not to the rich in spirit, but to the poor in spirit. And in that sense, this thing can belong to anyone and everyone. Especially when we choose to see ourselves not as the rich in spirit, but as a group of people who are in need of grace and a group of people who have it. That's the good news in Jesus Christ. So one group that doesn't get in are those who think they deserve it. The people who think they've earned it, the people who think they're good enough, righteous enough. Jesus says this isn't for the rich in spirit, it's for the poor in spirit. If the scribes and Pharisees can't get in, who can get in? Here's the other verse where Jesus says there's a group of people who will never get in. This is in Mark, but it also shows up, I'm going to read it to you in Mark, but it also shows up in Matthew and in Luke. This is a consistent teaching, a consistent story. This is Mark 10, starting in verse 13. People were bringing little children to him, to Jesus, in order that he might touch them. And the disciples spoke sternly to them. The disciples would not be a fan of Family Sunday. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. We don't often think about Jesus being indignant. It's like not the most fun sight. Other translations just use the word angry. We don't often like to think about Jesus being angry. There's not a lot of stained glass in the world that features mad Jesus, right? It's a good reason. It's probably tough to commission. I don't know who wants that hanging in their thing. But if you're going to do mad Jesus, there's like turning over tables Jesus, but this one is actually this one's pretty good, because if you're going to be mad about something, not that I'm anyone to tell Jesus what he can be mad about, he's Jesus, he can be mad about whatever he wants. But if we're going to be mad about something, keeping children away from who God is, keeping children away. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant, he was angry, and he said to his own disciples, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them. It is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter." If we think we're good enough on our own, doesn't work that way. And if we don't come as children, man, we're going to miss it. This thing is not for the Pharisees and the rich in spirits and the learned and the people who say, no, get these kids out of here. This thing is for kids. It's for the poor in spirit. It's for you and me. Those who are most assured of their own self-righteousness won't see it. And those who won't bring themselves like children won't see it either. Now, what do we know about kids? When we asked that question a couple weeks ago, what's the thing you say most in your household? What are the things you talk about the most? Our kids are 4 and 2. Do you know what the word that is most frequently spoken in our household actually is? Oh man, you did know. You guys, you were right. Batman's a close second. But there's some parents in the room, yes? The most frequently spoken word in our household is no. My own parents are here this morning. Maybe they could tell me how long it took for that to stop being the most frequently spoken word in our household when my sisters and I were younger. Maybe some of you that have teenagers or adults that are kids, because I've been an adult for a while when I was a kid. Maybe it never stops being no. And to be fair, maybe this is still the way God looks at us, right? Maybe God is up there going like, no, don't do that. Oh, don't do that. That's gonna hurt you. Like, that's just dumb. No, don't do that, and trying to get it through. So the good news is maybe there's a part of us as just flesh and blood human beings that never stops being childlike because, man, we don't know nothing yet. We have so much left to learn. And Jesus says this by far is the better posture than thinking we have learned it all. Jesus does not say, if you want to come, you have to come like a young adult. Jesus says, if you want to come, you have to come like a child. There is an inherent truth about children that there's some stuff that they don't know and some stuff that they don't understand. There's an inherent truth about children, but because there's some stuff that they don't know and they don't understand, do you know what the second most spoken word in our house probably is? Maybe third after Batman. Do you know what the second most spoken word in our house is? Yes, ma'am. Why? Often in multiples, right? If you want to come, you got to come like a child. And that includes, I would say by default, heaping doses of why. Because there's stuff I don't know. And I'd like to. And maybe I'll learn it and maybe I won't, but I want to know and I'd like to know now. And sometimes it's the why is the sky blue stuff, but other times it's I want this thing. This is the most frequent why in our house. I want this thing and I'm not getting it and I want to know why. We talk about how we approach God through prayer, how we do all of these things, being childlike. There are heaping doses of why. Do you know what else I know about kids? Tiana shared it last week. Kids are curious. Kids want to learn. I think, I'm no expert in this. I don't know what you have to do to be qualified as an expert in parenting, but I'm not that. But kids, I think, up to a point, are inherently trusting. Because they understand that they're kids and that there's bigger stuff than them out here and there's some things that they don't know. And so up to a point, or maybe up until they're wronged or hurt, kids trust. And it's that wild combination of the chasm of what we don't know, but also an inherent trust. Certainly a trust that can be harmed, damaged, wronged, all of those things. But for us and God, the wide chasm of what we don't know with the simultaneous call to trust, to believe that we do in fact have a good Father, that we have a parental figure in a sense that loves us, that's for us. Do you know what else I know about kids? They are less tired than I am. Christy said earlier, we do the same stuff over there that we do in here. I'm not sure that's 100% correct, right? There is an uninhibited joy in children And you're getting ready to see it in just a minute. One of my friends says that if all of us just walked and lived our lives like a 3-year-old, all of us would be in incredible shape. Because like the energy and the motion and all of that stuff and everything, like there is a joy in being a child that just is. And Jesus says, if you want to get in, not only does it anger Jesus when we keep kids away, but for us, we come not trusting in our own righteousness, not believing we're good enough for it, and not believing we're the rich in spirit, but recognizing that this thing is for everyone. And we see it best when we are most attuned to the grace inherent in it, and we see it best when we come like children. So that's a question for us today. The grown-ups in the room, this is the question for us. Is where might my faith benefit from being a little more childlike? Where might my faith benefit from being a little more childlike? Now, don't worry, when you see these kids up here in a minute, we're not going to ask you to do this next week. But I bet you there are some ways, because I know there are in me, that my faith could benefit by being a little more childlike. If you ask that question to the people that you love, the people you live with, maybe just where can our lives benefit by being more childlike? Because Jesus says, if you're going to come like a child. When people talk to me about heaven and the things they picture, 9 times out of 10, what they tell me they're picturing is either something from their own childhood that they loved, or somewhere they've been with their own children/grandchildren, where they loved watching them be childlike, and maybe it made you a little more childlike along the way. The very essence of the kingdom of heaven is childlikeness. Most of us that have graduated to adulthood wouldn't mind a little more energy and a little more flexibility for 10,000 years and then forevermore. Where can your faith benefit? Where can your life benefit from being a little more childlike? Because Jesus says, if you want to come like a child. Hey, thanks for joining us online. You can find us Sunday mornings at 9:30 or 11 a.m. at 323 West Emory Road in Powell, just off I-75 past the Kroger Marketplace. You can also join us for recovery worship on Thursday nights. To learn more about our church and get connected, visit powellchurch.com. You can find all kinds of information under the I'm New section. And if you'd like to support the mission of Powell Church, we appreciate your generosity. There's information on the screen that helps you get connected through stewardship and your giving. We hope this day's been a good one for you and that the grace of God has made itself known in your life. Have a great week.